Thank you very much, Helen, and good morning, everybody. So, the ZSL and its zoo travelers. Maybe not necessary with this audience, just a reminder where we are in the 19th century. These are the name of zoos and the year of their foundation, and as you very well know, this is generally described as a Western European phenomenon, particularly in the first half of the 19th century. Before then, zoos in a way spread first through other parts of Europe and then eventually around the world. And by 1900 we have zoos on all continents, around 100 at the time. So I'm interested in how these zoos start to form a global network, and this is particularly becomes intense around 1900. They exchange information, models, how to run their zoos. They write to each other, they meet. There are some journals that are read internationally, well, the proceedings of the ZSL, but also the German Zoologische Garten, the one from Buenos Aires, which is quite important. There's the animal trade that also, as we've heard from Herman, that kind of connects zoos. And my topic today are zoo travelers who visit other zoos to gather information how to run zoos. And then this is all very informal. It changes very much later on in the 20th century when there are formal associations like the what was later called the Vasa, etc. So I'm saying we should understand zoos as a network, yeah, and that they kind of constantly, like, they're looking, what are they doing? What can we use in our zoo? So they're copying, they're competing, but they're also learning from each other. And in this context, we may ask, well, how exactly was information gathered and exchanged? And my point here is that we should look more at these zoo travelers who have been not very much studied in zoo historiography, who otherwise is a very booming field, as we can see during this conference. So, as you very well know, zoos have, well, many issues to deal with, right? To keep their animals, zoo architecture, the crucial issue of nutrition, of how to make them procreate, veterinary care, how to transport them is tricky. What is a zoo for? I mean, are we here a scientific institution? Are we offering entertainment for the public? So there's also discussion there. And how do we, keep afloat with all these, buying these animals that cost so much money? How do we finance all of this? So these are the issues that zoo travelers then try and deal with. There are kind of different types of zoo travelers, if you like. Zoo directors who, for example, before they take on their job, prepare themselves by visiting other zoos. Sometimes they're sent by zoological societies or the municipality running the zoo. Then there's some what I call free-floating individuals with their own ideas about how a zoo should be reformed. There are foreign correspondents writing for zoo journals such as the Zoological Garden, etc., etc. And sometimes there are even specialists who, particularly then in the early 20th century, are only interested in aquariums, are only interested in the reptile house, etc. And this is one example of one of those reports by Gustave Loisel, the French zoo traveler, and Gustave Loisel and also Stanley Flower. They are kind of my main models for zoo travelers, both very active around 1900 in the early 20th century, and in particular Gustave Loisel in my talk now will serve a bit as kind of the benchmark for what zoo travelers may do. He did not work at a zoo. He was by training a physician, embryologist at the Sorbonne in Paris, but later on became a very important zoo traveler. So why is this all happening around 1900? interestingly, it seems that two of those, two first zoos, we remember the first slide, Paris and London, seem to be in some kind of a crisis around 1900. This is particularly the case for the small Paris zoo and the Jardin des Plantes. People complain it's overcrowded, the animals die in droves, the buildings seem old and inappropriate, personnel has no proper training, and that is why the Ministry for Public Instruction instructs Loisel to travel and gather all this information to reform the old national menagerie, right? Maybe the situation is not quite as critical in London, but there are also voices saying that, well, we were doing very well in the kind of last third of the 19th century with Sclater and Bartlett, but now around 1900, we've fallen a bit back. So there was much criticism of the management of the zoo from both the fellowship and the general public. So both of these major zoos in a bit of a crisis. I'm now going through the zoo travelers of the London Society, starting off with Sclater, who at least 9 times, maybe more, traveled to Western Europe. These are the publications from the proceedings, all very short notes, what he had seen in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and then later on in Germany. He mostly visited the same zoos. This seems to be kind of the cosmos, kind of the mental map of Sclater. What were the important zoos? Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. As you know, he was the secretary of the Zoological Society of London for a very long time. Loisel, before setting off on his journey, read what the London zoo travelers had written just around 1900 and before, and he criticizes them. Right? He says that, for example, that it's very kind of piecemeal what Sclater writes. He has no real vision of a zoo reform, and it is true he very much focuses on new spectacular animals in those foreign zoos, and does not hardly talk at all about practical issues of zoo management. So we may call this kind of the traditional kind of zoo travel, because at heart Sclater was not a zoo manager but a zoologist. Then there's the big game hunter Charles Peel, who visits 36 zoos in 1903 and writes a book about it. So that's interesting. But he does not really criticize the London Zoo. When he compares the other zoos he visited, the London Zoo always looks really great. And this is not to Loisel's liking. He says, well, he's imprecise, he makes mistakes, and there is no systematic in his book. As an aside, yesterday we talked briefly about the issue of zoo photography. This is a brilliant book if you want to know about the problems a zoo traveler may encounter when he tries to take photos in all different kinds of zoos. Sometimes he wasn't even allowed in, sometimes he had to pay a fee, sometimes he was taken off his camera by force from the guard, so Peel really struggled taking photos. Then there's Reginald Innes Pocock, who succeeded the Bartletts as superintendent of the London Zoo, and in preparation for his directorship he was sent again to zoos in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. He published a report, but I haven't found it yet. I'm not sure what he's saying. So, and after that, Loisel takes off and does his own zoo journeys mainly in 1906 and 1907, and he is a completely different order, right? He visits over 100 zoological institutions, mostly zoos, also aquariums and museums, and he travels far further than the London zoo travelers. He goes to as far as Eastern Europe, and then he also goes to the United States and Canada, and then he reads a lot. He's aware of what's going on in Calcutta and in Buenos Aires and so on. So he's really well informed, and he doesn't write short notes or unpublished reports. It's over 400 pages in 3 volumes of his scientific missions, as they are called. And just to kind of get an idea of these are not texts like the book by Peel that you can just, it's a good read. This is full of data, right? Wages of employees, cost of animal food, of all these different zoos. In the case of Loisel, he's inserting a lot of photos, plans, zoo plans, architectural plans. Here, aviaries of the London Zoo, the Lion House in Bristol, for example. So people may think, oh well, maybe we can need that in our zoo. What could we change? It's really data-driven. We may say, how many people work at the zoo, how many animals are there, how many mammals, reptiles, birds, etc. How much does that cost to feed them, etc., etc. So that's a very different approach to zoo management. Now we come back to the London Zoo, because this, of course, goes on. Peter Chalmers Mitchell goes but it's more of a lightning visit to the continent between Christmas and New Year's of 1913, and he has with him Edward George Boulanger, who at the time is the curator of reptiles and later becomes the director of the ZSL aquarium, and they visit several zoos, and Mitchell writes a report later on. Boulanger, after the war, also goes to Vienna, Berlin, and Amsterdam, in particular to look at aquariums, right? How are those colleagues doing? But he writes only a very short report about that. And just to give you an idea of these zoo travels, this is from Mitchell's report from 1913. He says the various directors were most kind of us and gave us every possible information. But as it's not, it's kind of, you see the interaction. It's not practical to take many notes in their presence or to occupy too much of their time. It was great. So they prepared themselves. It was a great advantage to have learned as much as possible before interviewing them. And then after that, we confirm, he and Boulanger, each other's mental notes. And they were riding in the train while the memory is still fresh. And then, of course, there's this issue of competition. I'm glad to say that I got the general impression that we've now surpassed the German gardens in cleanliness, absence of smell, and general care of the animals. We certainly have much improved in these respects since the first time I reported. So there is a bit of this idea of crisis around 1900 that's now being resolved. And we're still behind the German gardens with regard to individual attention, to the feeding of mammals, and much behind them as to the friendly control that the keepers have over individual animals here. And to conclude, Julian Huxley, mentioned several times during this conference, secretary between 1935 and 1942. He also travels to see what other zoos are doing. He's going to, I think he's the first one after ZSL to go to the United States to look at all those zoos there, but also to Germany. And he writes up several reports. They're not very, very extensive. And he doesn't go zoo by zoo, but he focuses on noteworthy features and enclosures of each of those zoos he visited that he might think might be of use for the London Zoo. And he's also interested, what are the scientists doing there, or the vets in those zoos. This example from the Philadelphia Zoo, he gives a tuberculin test to all monkeys on arrival. If the test is twice positive, the animal is killed. This has contributed to a great lowering of tuberculosis mortality, huge problem for monkeys in the zoo since for a long time. Right, I'm coming to a close. To conclude, as we've seen, I think nearly all the secretaries and many of the superintendents of the zoo traveled. Although mostly to the same zoos in kind of Western Europe. They produce very different kinds of reports. Some just short articles, unpublished reports. In the case of Peel, we even have a book. They're mostly descriptive. What's there, what can we see, and compared with Lovell, not very systematic or kind of trying to get the whole picture of zookeeping, and they kind of move as regards the relationship of the zoos. They're kind of in between competition and cooperation. I think that is very typical. Now the question you may ask, well, how much did those zoo travels help to modernize the London Zoo? That's hard to say. Right? That can only be seen in some very specific points, and we're usually talking about adaptation. It is more about, I think, creating a network. Keeping in conversation with your colleagues from the continent, and be up to date. What's the newest trend in zookeeping? That's all from me. Thank you very much.